Forget sleepers, forget value picks. These are the guys who could absolutely wreck your league in the best way possible. I'm talking nuclear level upside players with a talent, situation, and ceiling to finish as the number one player at their position. If you hit on even one of these guys, your league mates are done. Let's break down the 5 players who are about to go absolutely nuclear in 2025. If you're itching to draft fantasy teams right now, don't wait. Underdog Fantasy has live drafts running all offseason with fun, unique formats, including their flagship Best Ball Mania 6, which will make multiple millionaires in 2025. Plus, pick'ems are already live for week 1. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com, sign up with promo code ENDGAME, and they'll match your deposit up to $1,000 in bonus funds, plus toss in a free gimme pick. Starting with Malik Nabers, and now if you watched my video breaking down who I thought would be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy this year, I was actually really torn between him and Nico Collins. Because Malik Nabers is legitimately already one of the best wide receivers in the entire league. Last year, he had a 75% success rate versus man, 76% versus press, and 80% versus zone. On top of that, he was 11th among all wide receivers in yards after the catch. He could truly do everything on a football field, and I love that the Giants realized that. Last year, 2nd in targets, 1st in target share, and 2nd in target rate. And remember, he only played 15 games. The Giants go to him over and over again. They scheme easy ways to get him the ball. He literally is this Giants offense. But what held him back from really breaking out last year and having a monster season was the deep ball. Last year, he was 5th in deep targets, yet his yards per reception was only 82nd. Why? Because none of his quarterbacks could actually throw the deep ball. Say whatever you want about Russell Wilson at this stage of his career, he can still sling that deep ball. Last year, he had the 2nd highest deep ball completion percentage of any quarterbacks, and his number 1 wide receiver, George Pickens, he led all wide receivers in deep ball catch percentage. We are going to finally see Malik Nabers unleash this year fully, not just those underneath throws, but on those deep routes, and that is going to open up his game and open up his fantasy ceiling. The only thing that could potentially hold Malik Nabers back this year is that toe injury, but so far it doesn't sound serious. If this guy is okay and that toe is good to go with Russell Wilson under center all year, he absolutely has the potential to be the highest scoring wide receiver in all of fantasy football and is absolutely primed to go nuclear this year. He's a guy I'm absolutely targeting in my fantasy drafts if I can get him. But in that video, I did pick Nico Collins just because I trust Nico a little bit more with CJ Stroud. Last year in Nico's healthy games, he averaged over 19 points per game, had a 28% target share, and the 2nd highest yards per route run. But what could really separate Nico Collins from all the other wide receivers this year is touchdowns. Last year, he had an absurd 48% end zone target share in his healthy games. He scored 15 touchdowns in his last 27 games, and that includes the games he left early with injury. And when he was on the field last year, he accounted for 44% of his team's receiving yards and 40% of their touchdowns. Just like Malik Nabers, he is the Houston offense. And if all that wasn't enough for you, last year he led all wide receivers in fantasy points per route run by a mile. He was at 0.68 fantasy points per route run last year. 2nd place, Amon-Ra St. Brown, was only at 0.58. He wasn't just better than every other wide receiver when healthy last year. He was miles better than every other wide receiver when healthy last year. And it's not just for fantasy. This is a stud wide receiver. Last year, he ranked in the 93rd percentile versus man coverage and the 96th percentile versus press, while also posting an incredibly strong 81% success rate versus zone coverage. He also had an 81% contested catch rate last year, which makes sense for a guy his size. But what doesn't make sense is how good this guy is after the catch for such a big wide receiver. He only went down on first contact on 46% of his in-space attempts last year, while averaging 5.6 yards after catch per reception. That was ahead of guys like A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Like, this guy can also rack up yards after the catch, despite being a huge red zone threat and an incredible contested catch guy. And when you look at the situation in Houston this year, they could have one of the worst run games. Joe Mixon already dealing with a foot injury that sounds pretty serious. Nick Chubb, come on, this guy's dust and he's been just beaten down by injuries the last couple of years. They might need to throw the ball 35 plus times every single week, and most of those targets are going to go Nico's way. Now, the only worry here for Nico is health, because he's never played a full season in his career. But that doesn't mean he can't do it this year. We've seen many guys suddenly put together a fully healthy season and absolutely ball out. He's also entering the peak age for wide receivers. This is typically when we see wide receivers have their best seasons of their career I think this year Nico puts it all together, stays healthy for 17, and absolutely helps teams win fantasy championships and goes absolutely nuclear in 2025. Did you know in NFL history there have only been 6 running backs ever to catch at least 100 passes? But we're about to see number 7, and that's going to be De'Von Achane. Last year he had 78 catches, but in the games Tua played, he averaged over 6 receptions per game. He was on a 17-game pace of 103 catches. And that was with Jonnu Smith there, who had the second most targets on the team with 111. Now, sure, all of those Jonnu targets aren't going to go Achane's way, but a good majority of them are going to. Not to mention, last year, De'Von Achane ranked second among all players in design targets. You know who was 13th? Jonnu Smith, who's no longer on the team. Some of those design targets are also going to go Achane's way. And when you look back at the other running backs who had at least 100 receptions, minus Larry Sanders, who was technically a wide receiver, they all finished top 3 at the position, and many finished as an RB1 that year. But then when you factor in he also had over 200 carries last year, had 72% of the team's goal line carries, this is more than just a pass-catching scat back here. This is a guy who has 23 touchdowns in his first 28 NFL games, and he's been the RB6 and the RB5 in points per game each of the first 2 years. And with the Dolphins being more careful with Tua, not wanting them to be in the pocket too long, we're going to see more of those quick throws, more of those running back screens. And I really do think De'Von Achane is going over 100 catches this year. And if he is, there's nothing that can stop him from going nuclear in fantasy football. Unless you're in a non-PPR league, of course. But if you play in any kind of PPR league and he's catching over 100 passes, he's absolutely going to go nuclear. He's one of my favorite picks in the second round of fantasy drafts. This guy should be a first rounder. If you get him in the second round, that's going to be a steal. Now, when the Jets first signed Justin Fields this offseason, I thought it was a kiss of death for Garrett Wilson. But you know, the more I look at it, the more I'm really coming around on Garrett Wilson going nuclear in 2025. First of all, let's talk his talent. Last year, 77% success rate versus man, 78% success rate versus press, and 82% success rate versus zone. Those are elite wide receiver numbers, and he had an above average success rate on every route except the 9 route. So what did the Jets do last year? Naturally, they asked him to run the slant and the 9 route on about half of his routes. What are we doing, Jets? Just a complete misuse of this guy's talent, which shouldn't be surprising because after they fired Robert Saleh, the coaching went to heck. But all that should change this year with new head coach Aaron Glenn and, I think more importantly, Detroit's passing game coordinator from last year, Tanner Engstrand, coming in as the offensive coordinator. This is basically going to be Detroit 2.0. And you know what you gotta love? The fact that when Aaron Glenn was asked about Garrett Wilson, his answer was, get him the ball as much as possible. This is what you want to hear as a fantasy player. Get this guy the ball. Scheme ways to get him open. Give him screens. Give him easy touches. Let this guy do his thing. Now, of course, the elephant in the room here is the quarterback, Justin Fields. And sure, Justin Fields isn't going to pass for 3,500, 4,000 yards this year. But you know what? I don't think it matters because whatever yards he does pass for, they're almost all going to go to Garrett Wilson and maybe some to Mason Taylor, the rookie tight end. There really isn't anybody else on this roster. Josh Reynolds is the wide receiver too. Malachi Corley, that's not happening. Xavier Gibson, nah. There is nobody else here. It is going to be the Garrett Wilson show in the passing game. And let's not forget, back in 2023, DJ Moore had over 1,300 yards while Fields passed for only 2,500. And don't also forget that year, he had to play 4 games with Tyson Bagent at quarterback. And in those games, he never had more than 33 receiving yards. So sure, Justin Fields may not unlock Garrett Wilson to his absolute fullest. This may not be the best season Garrett Wilson will ever have in his career, but you know what? It's going to be the best season he's ever had up to this point, and I do think he's ready to go nuclear. Maybe he doesn't quite have the upside of the Neighbors and the Nico Collins, but I think we could be looking at a top 5 wide receiver here in fantasy that you're getting pretty much in the 3rd round in most of your fantasy drafts this year. I know Garrett Wilson has burned us. I know we're worried about Justin Fields, but I think it's going to be just fine for Garrett Wilson. I think the Jets are just going to force feed him so many targets that it's not going to matter. He's going to be great in fantasy this year. I'm drafting him every time I can. And then I know I'm kind of known for hating tight ends, but I got to talk about a tight end, and I got to talk about George Kittle. Last year, he was technically the tight end 1 in points per game, going over 1,100 receiving yards with 8 touchdowns. But you know what? I think he's going to do even better this year. Because what was the catalyst last year? The catalyst was they had no pass catchers. Brandon Ayuk basically missed the whole season. Deebo Samuel was there, but he basically missed the whole season too. They had to utilize George Kittle. Well, what do we got going into this year? Brandon Ayuk looks nowhere close to returning. Jawan Jennings, who I like, already dealing with his second calf injury of the offseason, and Ricky Pearsall repeatedly getting banged up. You know what's going to happen in 2025? The 49ers are going to need George Kittle a ton again. Now, a lot of drafters are expecting Brock Bowers, who typically goes second round, and Trey McBride, who typically goes third round, to absolutely explode this year. But you know what? Just get George Kittle 3 rounds later. He could be every bit as good or better than these guys because, honestly, he's got more touchdown upside than both of those guys, and that is huge for fantasy tight ends. Kittle was already the tight end 1 last year. I think he does even better in 2025 and goes absolutely nuclear this year. If you're going to take early tight end, just wait until round 5, round 6, grab George Kittle, because I think he's going to be a league winner once again in fantasy in 2025. But if you're going to be a league winner in 2025 and dominate your competition, you know what you got to do. You got to stick around, watch all the endgame videos we're dropping for you this offseason, and you can find them in our playlist right here.